This episode is supported by NatWest, providing ease of mind when it comes to business payments.
NatWest Pay It, the bank's own payment solution, facilitates customer payments in near real time while allowing companies to track live spending. Need to collect payments without customer account numbers or process refunds without holding on to personal details? Pay It has your business covered.
Pay It connects directly with each customer's bank account using an API, which also allows data to be seamlessly and securely passed onto third parties. That means you can provide the best payment experience on the front end while empowering your back-end staff with the info they need for truly data-driven decision-making.
To find out more, visit payitbynatwest.com/ITPro. That's payitbynatwest.com/ITPro. If one company can be said to have walked away the winner of the generative AI boom of the last few years, it's OpenAI. The startup, which was founded as a non-profit with the mission to drive progress towards artificial general intelligence, aka machine consciousness, has led the pack of generative AI developers since it launched ChatGPT in 2022 and quickly became a household name.
But in recent months, more and more questions have been raised about the viability of OpenAI in the long term. As some of the biggest companies in the world look to pin down AI return on investment, OpenAI is still laying out its exact profit model. Can it keep its AI crown, or is it on a downward trajectory? You're listening to the IT Pro podcast.
Hi, I'm Jane McCallion.
And I'm Rory Bathgate.
And today we're looking at the inner workings of OpenAI to understand how the company is faring amid strong competition and how it could perform in the next year. So I think, Rory, we can cut to the chase a little bit here. OpenAI, or specifically ChatGPT, when it exploded onto the scene in 2022, really took hold of people's imaginations. So that is just your everyday person on the street, through to tech executives. You know, I always say it's very weird when my work intrudes on my personal life and suddenly people are talking to me about stuff that I'm talking at work. And that's not a thing that normally happens, considering my main topics of conversation are like supercomputers, servers, business strategy of some of the hyperscalers and that kind of thing. So to suddenly be in a situation where everyone's like, oh yeah, you must have an opinion on ChatGPT or, generative AI. Oh yeah. Very exciting. Everybody's just kind of like, you start to see this rush to like do something with it. But that question's proving to be more difficult to answer than one might have thought. People want to do something, but answering what ChatGPT, which is OpenAI's core product, is actually for, is proving difficult to answer.
Yeah, so like you said, ChatGPT kind of came to define generative AI, especially in its first year of existence. You found people were using it almost as a byword for generative AI. I had relatives asking me, "What do you think of ChatGPT? This technology, ChatGPT." And people might not know what a transformer model is, or what even a large language model is, but people do know the word ChatGPT.
I suppose it's like Google becoming a verb meaning to use a search engine, even if
Yes.
Google is not the engine that you're using, and across languages as well. That's just how it's become.
Yeah, exactly. So OpenAI kind of won that initial battle, and ChatGPT proved an extremely useful kind of test case for showing people all the, I guess, the possibilities of large language models when it comes particularly to text synthesis, or if you're looking to make quite an interactive chatbot. GPT 3.5, which was the first version that most people got their hands on, and then GPT 4 the next year was a good kind of playground for that. It showed especially business leaders, this is quite sophisticated. You can get quite sophisticated results. Obviously, it also shone a light on the limitations of the technology as well. So OpenAI had previously not released things like GPT-2 to the public because they were just had a propensity to kind of go off the rails and give wild responses. And certainly the first year of ChatGPT being a thing, a lot of people found ways to break it. People found ways to get it to produce results that OpenAI wouldn't necessarily want them to. Uh, but I guess what we're getting at here is very early on, what you got was a lot of evangelists. You got a lot of people on Twitter talking about, here are the 10 things you can use ChatGPT for. If you're not doing this, you're missing out.
Mm,
And a lot of it at the time was people trying to figure out ways to kind of automate email creation. Now that
yeah.
subsequently has become a product in and of itself through a myriad of different AI developers and vendors, but also things like idea generation or producing bullet points quite quickly to come up with a plan for a meeting or to strategize.
Mm,
I mean, listeners can ask themselves, have I used ChatGPT? If I've used it, what have I used it for? It doesn't quite feel like we've ever really progressed beyond that point with ChatGPT. OpenAI has, subsequently become embroiled in a lot of other products. It's the basis for Microsoft's Copilot offerings. So GPT-4, and 4.0 and o1, which are OpenAI's flagship models,
yeah.
underpin most of Microsoft's AI products. I say most because Microsoft are quite tight-lipped about they don't want to necessarily forever marry themselves to these models. They talk about the fact that they use some other models under the hood as well, but definitely they're pretty proud of their partnership with OpenAI.
Mm,
But from OpenAI's perspective, it still doesn't really have that killer use case. And increasingly, you've seen people start to talk about using it as a search engine. I think in the last year, especially, I've seen people say, I just do all my research on ChatGPT now. And that always makes me shudder.
it's bad news for Google.
Yeah, it is. It's bad news for.
Well, no, not just from a kind of like, potential user loss, but also Google have inserted their own AI into Google,
Yeah,
presumably in reaction to this in part. You can search for something and you'll get the Google AI of questionable helpfulness, in its responses.
yeah.
Interesting result. I saw somebody post on Blue Sky the other day that an alternative to salt pork that is kosher is in fact pancetta or lomo,
Wow.
so both of which are famously also not kosher. So yeah, and like you say, it's tricky. When you see people go, "Oh well, I just use it for all my research. It's my search engine now. I find it so much better." It's like that's like saying that I use a paint stripper as a hairdryer nowadays because they
Yeah,
do similar things and they look kind of the same.
yeah. It's definitely that issue again where, when you have the hammer, everything looks like a nail, that kind of thing where, okay,
Mm,
now you have this amazing AI tool. If you want to use it for everything in your life, maybe you can, but should you? And definitely OpenAI is not selling ChatGPT as an alternative to Google
no.
yet. I mean, there have been some suggestions. There have been reports, and more or less since ChatGPT first launched, that OpenAI internally was looking at maybe leveraging more and more search functionality through ChatGPT itself.
Mm,
But we're not there yet. And I mean, why are we talking about all of this? It's because ChatGPT is very expensive to run, and all of
mhm,
OpenAI's models currently are incredibly expensive to run. OpenAI is it's a private company. It doesn't necessarily go into a great amount of detail about its operating costs. You can't break down by, for example, AI model. You can't see they spend this much on the OpenAI API per year and this much on ChatGPT.
mm,
But we do have some ideas. The Information did a great piece of reporting earlier this year, which found that just training and inference costs, so that's training new models or fine tuning existing models, and then inference is pushing information through a model in order to get an output. It's the bread and butter of generative AI models. It's them actually running and producing that information. All of that together could cost OpenAI as much as $7 billion this year, according
mm.
to uh, the Information, which is obviously
It's quite a lot of money.
it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and of course, OpenAI has Microsoft's backing. It has since before most people knew what OpenAI even is as a company, and it's relied heavily on Microsoft's infrastructure to train its own models, and it continues to rely on Microsoft Azure to actually run its models. But there's only so much that Microsoft can actually do when it comes to
Yeah.
cash injection, doesn't there?
Yeah, there is. And I think it's worth pointing out that 7 billion in costs is a problem for a company that it doesn't really have a model for profit at this point. That so earlier in this year, in 2024, there was a big upheaval within the company. Sam Altman, who was at the time the CEO, was ousted as because he wanted to move more towards a for-profit model. Microsoft very kindly took him and a bunch of other employees in. Lots of people were like, well, if he's gone, I'm gone. Very quickly, this led to Altman being reinstated as the head of OpenAI. I think the whole thing took, maybe 48 to 72 hours, if that. Everyone was back. Microsoft never actually had to give anybody a job. Nobody signed a contract. It was fine from their point of view. And the drive towards becoming a for-profit, no longer open source necessarily company took hold, and that's the direction that it's gone in. So it plans to be a profitable company, but as any business person will know, you can plan to become a profitable company as much as you like, but actually achieving that takes more than goodwill and deep intentions and serious amounts of wishing. You've got to actually do something. And as you said earlier, there's no sort of killer app for this yet. There's no clear use case. And this is going to prove, in my opinion, to be an increasing problem for OpenAI. And yeah, I'm not the only person who holds this opinion at all.
No, of course. And at this point, it's worth mentioning there is a dividing line between ChatGPT and the API I mentioned earlier.
Mm,
There's a lot of services that run on OpenAI through Azure where you can call specific models, and there's a separate pricing model for that where you can
mm,
pay per token to if you built a front end for say a chatbot, you could run it on OpenAI's models via Microsoft Azure, and potentially there's more enterprise use there. ChatGPT continues to be quite consumer focused, but actually at time of recording today, the OpenAI newsroom Twitter account tweeted that there are 300 million active ChatGPT users per week now. There's a billion user messages sent on ChatGPT per day, and that requires a lot of processing power and it requires a lot of energy, and all of that racks up as major costs. I mean, of that figure we gave earlier, the information estimates that $4 billion alone will be ChatGPT specific running costs, and that's a lot of money to spend annually. And that number is going up because there are more users and more messages.
mm.
That's a lot of money to spend on something that doesn't have an obvious profit model.
Also, if you look at those numbers a bit, 300 million is quite a lot. 1 billion is a lot when it comes to user messages, but actually that there's a discrepancy between that 1 billion and 300 million, that you therefore actually have kind of a handful of people sending an awful lot of messages, because of those weekly active ChatGPT users. I mean, I could, in theory, be a active ChatGPT user if I send, a couple of messages a week?
Yeah.
If I just kind of go, how old is the song Baby Shark? And why is there a variation in tunes? That's one message. And then, can you clarify for me the difference between hammer and mama when it comes to the media recordings? There's two quite different questions. Two like that a week, two very casual searches would make me one of those weekly active users. And so you've potentially got an even, or potentially, certainly, to my mind, got an even smaller core of users who are sending loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of queries or carrying out long conversations versus, probably a decent proportion who are using it a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And we come back again to the fact that of that massive user base, not everyone will be paying.
Yeah.
There are paid plans for ChatGPT. So there's
Hmm.
the free version that people will be familiar with. There's also Plus, which is $20 per month, and it gets you some extra features. It gets you access to some of their pre-release models and early access to new features and things like image generation. There's also ChatGPT Team and Enterprise, which are aimed at business users, and those vary in price. It's kind of a per user per month thing where you
Yeah.
contact their sales department. But all of this obviously is happening against the background of an industry that is suddenly really interested in as many different AI models as it can possibly create.
Yeah, and that leads us to something else, which is that increasingly companies are being offered the opportunity to train their own LLMs, so large language model, the technology that underpins all of ChatGPT and all the other publicly accessible generative AI software or tools that are out there. The reason for this is not really wanting to expose your data to OpenAI's systems, either for security purposes or potentially accidentally putting your crown jewels in there, letting OpenAI train its LLMs on your information, and then it's available to everybody else, which is something that's already happened. We'll put a link in the show notes. Or just not wanting to hand over information free. You know, OpenAI, get something out of this as well. So you see some companies are offering the opportunity for customers, generally speaking, enterprise customers here, we're talking, large businesses, to train their own LLMs, their own chatbots, their own generative AI. And that is also going to eat into this business model if you're trying to attract enterprises, but actually they've done the work themselves on stuff that they trust.
Yeah, exactly. I think there was an initial surge in interest in these public cloud AI models in 2022, the start of 2023, but it's kind of two different things going on there. There's the early adopters who rushed in and got burned, or they didn't, but they found out that it was quite expensive actually to run every single AI prompt in the
Mm.
cloud and pay Microsoft for the honor of doing so, or pay OpenAI directly through their API. And have since found out, well, some of these customer queries, maybe we can put that through ChatGPT, but other things like internal, like code generation, for example, let's train our own model on our own
Mm.
proprietary code and do that. And that ends up being more secure and potentially cheaper. And at the same time, you have these more cautious sectors, such as finance or healthcare,
Mm.
who didn't rush in and sat back and watched the sector slowly begin to mature when it came to generative AI and
Mm.
have since begun to invest, but with a much clearer vision of, okay, well, this can be done in the cloud. This absolutely cannot be done in the cloud. This has to be done internally, fine tuning a model on our own data, or otherwise grounding it in our own data. OpenAI really benefited from that initial hype cycle, but it
Mm.
hasn't necessarily risen up to the challenge posed by these enterprises that don't really trust the public cloud.
You've reminded me also of a piece of research that came across my inbox a little while ago, which showed that it was about IT overspend. So CIOs and so on looking at areas where they feel that they are spending too much money. And something that really stood out for me was that they felt that they were really, really overspending on AI, but that they will continue to spend, like, they're gonna increase the amount that they're spending on AI in the coming year. And I think that's, kind of very illustrative of the point. The enthusiasm for AI, but without necessarily a point at this stage. And I will say, I think that the research was carried out middle of the year, sort of maybe towards the end of the second third of the year. So at a time where there still was an awful lot of hype, I'd be interested to see what that research says if the same questions were run next year.
Absolutely. And of course, OpenAI isn't the only AI player in the cloud.
No.
All of this has been happening against a backdrop of an industry that is very interested in making money off generative AI. Listeners will be aware that all of the hyperscalers have invested a lot of money in this. So that's AWS, Microsoft Azure, as we mentioned, and also Google Cloud have poured billions of dollars into developing their own models, releasing their own AI offerings. So with Google, it's been integrating generative AI into its workspace and Gmail offerings, for example, but then also investing in other AI developers. So, for example, Amazon and Google have both poured billions of dollars into the AI developer Anthropic, which is one of OpenAI's chief competitors in terms of the proprietary models that are very sophisticated. They're performant to a similar degree. They benchmark similarly.
Which is hardly surprising given that Anthropic was founded primarily by people who had left OpenAI over differences in vision, I think is probably the best way of putting it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So you have these two competing companies that they both say that they're committed to responsible AI development, and at the same time, they're both charting a similar course of chasing the most sophisticated models on the market. At the same time, you also have other developers like Mistral, for example, which Amazon has invested money in, producing its own models. And then you have a vibrant open source AI community as well, which is curiously led kind of by Meta in terms of Meta's Llama models are free to use and are very sophisticated and perform very well. Although there's a whole separate discussion to be had around whether Llama is actually open source because it comes with
Yeah,
certain, for example, if you're a company as big as Google, you can't use it without Meta's permission. If you're a small business, you can. So
yeah.
maybe free is a better word for Llama. But all of this is to say that even as OpenAI has struggled to define itself in a vacuum, around it, the whole industry has been working to figure out, okay, what model can we use for which use case, which company is best for our purposes? Do we want to spend money on this or that in the cloud or on prem? So it's a much more complex environment for OpenAI to actually succeed in than it was in November 2022.
Mm, mm.
This episode is brought to you by Cloudways, a managed hosting platform built to deliver the speed, simplicity, and reliability your business needs. Cloudways partners with industry-leading cloud providers like AWS, Google Cloud, and DigitalOcean, offering flexible and customizable plans to fit your unique requirements. With 24/7 live expert support, help is always just a click away. And right now, they're giving a flat 40% off on all their plans for 4 months straight. That's not all. You also get 40 expertly handled free migrations. Just use the promo BFCM2024 to grab this deal and free yourself from hosting headaches. Enjoy a seamless experience where your sites perform at their best, whether you're launching an e-commerce store or handling multiple client projects. Head to cloudways.com to discover how they can power your next big project.
I think, to my mind, when we look at OpenAI and some of the other models as well, it reminds me somewhat of the social media boom. So even pre kind of Facebook and Twitter and so on, even looking back at MySpace and LiveJournal, all these kinds of things, it was difficult and continues to be difficult for social media companies to build a profitable model. Now, Facebook has gone largely down the advertising side of things and selling premium offerings to businesses. If we look at Twitter, I don't feel that Twitter ever got there. It has ads. It was going to introduce a premium offering anyway that accelerated under Elon Musk. But in many ways, the reality is that Musk's money has been propping up what is now X.
Yeah.
It's trying with Grok, it's trying with what was going to be Twitter Blue, but it's called something else now. I think it's possibly just X Premium. You can tell that I don't pay for these things. LinkedIn similarly has a premium offering, but it is for a slightly different audience. It's especially for marketers. recruiters, so businesses really, and also, if you're an individual who really wants to stand out, then you can put your money into that as well. There's an element of that around it that, and we did see that in the Financial Times recently, which reported that OpenAI's CFO, Sarah Fryer, had suggested that the company might look at introducing ads onto its platform to raise revenues organically, because until now it's been dependent on investors.
Mm.
So in its most recent funding round, as we reported, had it not raised the amount that it needed, which was 6 billion, am I right, Rory?
6.6 billion is what it raised in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, but had it not hit its target, which was slightly lower than that, it would have gone bankrupt within 12 months. So it's going to need to start looking at these ways of organically bringing in money. Ads, to me, is a really obvious one, even though they've said that it's just one option, not a formal plan, which doesn't rule it out. You
Mm.
look at other business models. Google still gets a majority of its revenue from ads, and people want to sell stuff to other people. You may even hear some adverts on this very podcast. And it seems like a sensible model. And then you get the whole kind of premium pay to not see the ads, and you end up kind of going down that classic route. Do you think that's something that would be workable for a company like OpenAI and a product like ChatGPT?
I think the difficulty for OpenAI is it comes back to that same question of what am I using this for?
Mm,
Because a lot of the products and a lot of the companies that you've mentioned, they actually caught people's attention with a really killer product. So Google completely conquered the search engine, made the best search engine in the world, not even close in terms of its performance compared to some of the other search engines available at the time. And at least that's how it became to be seen
yeah.
in the eyes of the public. Google became a verb for using a search engine.
Mm,
Same with Facebook. Facebook was kind of, I mean, MySpace beforehand had occupied that space in people's minds. Then it became Facebook. It became kind of the primo social media for a lot of people.
yes, it was much better.
Yes, it used to be a lot better, and it became better than MySpace, and now it's kind of in its downturn. But I think that's the arc that a lot of these things follow, is that they are kind of a killer product, then they add ads, and then you have years after of trying to maintain your space, trying to
Mm,
maintain your dominance in the market. For me, ChatGPT hasn't got to that perfect product point. So if you were looking to add adverts into what is essentially an app that people use for different things and no one can quite agree on what it's really, really good at,
mm,
you potentially spoil some of that goodwill, particularly when people are starting to try out other, competitor products, and also people are starting to run LLMs on their own PCs. I mean, increasingly lightweight models can be run on device.
yeah,
That costs you, really nothing, particularly if it's an open source model. And for some of the things, what I mentioned earlier, some of those hype people who in 2022 were saying, I use it every day just to, give me my to-do list. They're probably not running that on ChatGPT these days, in my
yeah.
opinion. They're probably running it, if not on their actual laptop, then maybe they found an API that's a bit better than that. Maybe they found something that's a bit cheaper than that. And for them to actually stick around on ChatGPT, it needs to be the best at one specific thing. And like I said, no one can agree what that is.
I wonder now if OpenAI and its products is going to be a little bit like foundational technology that has gone before.
Mm.
By which I mean like Amstrad, Commodore, Sinclair, these kinds of things that they were superseded by people who did it better, who were able to build a better product. Yes, they may have been bought out, or their IP bought or whatever, but ultimately they are no longer with us. And if it, kind of the idea of what OpenAI could do will stay, but that perhaps OpenAI itself will go. That said, however, large language models, LLMs, which is ultimately what underpins GPT, the various iterations of it, is not a new technology by any stretch of the imagination.
No. So it's interesting. If you talk to any expert in the AI space, particularly people who were there for Google's paper on transformers that came out in
Mm.
2017, this isn't new technology. I remember having a discussion with an expert in 2023 who had said, I've been working on this for a decade. This isn't new to me. All that's new is the way it's being applied and the specific models that are being used. But the actual
Yeah.
architecture was based on a lot of existing research. And as you suggested, it could be that in the years to come, what we see is generative AI in the sort of nebulous way that we understand it. You put a prompt in, something comes out, or you show it something on a camera, and an AI model can respond to the visual information of what it's seeing. That
Yeah.
continues to be a thing, but that LLMs, as we currently understand them, are superseded by another model or another architecture, another approach to neural
Mm.
networks, which is more performant, maybe cheaper, maybe less energy intensive, maybe all three. I mean, this is something that a lot of AI developers are grappling with right now. OpenAI among them is the limits of LLMs. So that same expert who I spoke to a few years ago had at the time expressed surprise that they were performing as well as they were, because years ago scientists had said, well, we're working in this space. We think that there is an absolute limit on how efficient a model can actually be
Mm.
relative to how much data you can feed it. And there is a finite amount of data in the world that is readily accessible. This is
Mm.
why OpenAI is eager to form deals with companies to get access to more data, and why every AI developer is constantly looking to scrape data from the public internet. You can't have infinite growth that is tied to a finite amount of data,
Mm.
particularly when the improvements that you're seeing are so incremental. So there's been a lot of reporting in the last few months that developers are now reaching the point, maybe a few years after researchers thought they would, but nonetheless reaching it, where general models like GPT-4, which ChatGPT runs on,
Mm.
are becoming less and less efficient. So it might be that whenever GPT-5 comes out, I mean, there are some rumors that it would be called something like Orion, or maybe that's a code name for what will eventually be GPT-5.
I'm getting some Half-Life 3 vibes forming here.
Yes, exactly.
Carry on.
Exactly. The leap between GPT-4 and 5, it might be less impressive than the leap between GPT-3 and 4
Mm.
was. There was a report in Bloomberg a few weeks ago that had suggested that this isn't OpenAI alone. This is Google, Anthropic are also experiencing this. That given the amount of data that we have, given the architectures that we're using, they are reaching now the limits of how good a model can actually be. That the next model, whenever a new model comes out, you get the benchmark table where it says,
Mm.
aha, GPT-4 is 96% good at this, and our model is 97%. Beyond a point, that's not something that users can even notice, those
Yeah.
incremental improvements. And again, we come back to, if it's not noticeably better, why
Mm.
would you pay for it?
Yeah. It's like, the resolution on TVs, actually,
Yeah.
if you think about it, or computer screens or whatever, that the jump from CRT to even the earliest LEDs, which were flat but fat, and so on and so forth, that was huge. And then there's been a couple of, like, big-ish leaps, but now if I look at my TV, which is, kind of fine. It's decent, but it's not one of the mega super clear looking out of a window ones that you have. But it is an incremental improvement compared to what we had before. And similarly, sort of gaming consoles, big leaps, and then now each generation is a noticeable improvement. But the difference between, say, a PlayStation 4 and a PlayStation 5 is less than the difference between a 3 and a 4, which was less than a 2 and a 3, and less than a 1 and a 2.
I think it's worth mentioning here that when it comes to AI, that's not a reason to be pessimistic about the potential for future models, or the potential rather for the idea of AI models going forward. We've had that leap from traditional air quotes to generative AI in the last few years, but these are just two approaches, and even traditional AI as a banner encompasses a wide range of different approaches to neural networks, to machine learning, to predictive AI, and everything that comes under those. So there's every reason to believe that researchers will come up with new, more efficient ways to predict outcomes with AI, or even to produce data. It's just that the models that OpenAI is currently selling and its competitors are currently selling might seem old hat given 5 years development time. And it's whether OpenAI as a company can actually pivot to profit off of that. And at present, it does seem to be putting a lot of its eggs into that LLM architecture basket.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. But as always, you can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website at itpro.com.
You can also follow us on LinkedIn, as well as subscribe to our daily newsletter. Don't forget to subscribe to the IT Pro podcast wherever you find podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show, let us know by leaving a rating or a review.
We'll be back next week with more from the world of IT. But until then, goodbye.
Goodbye. This episode is supported by NatWest, providing ease of mind when it comes to business payments.
NatWest Payit, the bank's own payment solution, facilitates customer payments in near real time while allowing companies to track live spending. Need to collect payments without customer account numbers or process refunds without holding on to personal details? Payit has your business covered.
Payit connects directly with each customer's bank account using an API, which also allows data to be seamlessly and securely passed onto third parties. That means you can provide the best payment experience on the front end while empowering your back-end staff with the info they need for truly data-driven decision-making.
To find out more, visit payitbynatwest.com/itpro. That's payitbynatwest.com/itpro.